The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tree-lined streets of Oak Ridge Heights, a neighborhood where lawn sprinklers hissed in perfect rhythm and luxury cars gleamed in circular driveways. Thomas Johnson walked with purpose, a blue folder tucked under his arm and a determination in his steps that belied his 14 years. Every few houses he'd stop, straighten his school tie, and practice his pitch under his breath before ringing another doorbell. Just 5 more houses, he told himself, marking off another address on his list. The basketball team needed new uniforms, and Coach Taylor had challenged each player to sell at least 20 raffle tickets. Thomas, always eager to prove himself, had set a personal goal of 30. At 1487 Maple Avenue, a grand 2-story colonial with white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges, Thomas paused to check his phone. His mom had texted asking when he'd be home for dinner. He quickly replied that he needed another hour, then climbed the porch steps and rang the bell. After waiting nearly a minute with no response, he sat down on the top step to update his sales log. Across the street, Bethany Miller was unloading groceries from the trunk of her car when she spotted Thomas. She had been visiting her sister in Oak Ridge Heights for the weekend, unused to the neighborhood's unspoken codes and invisible boundaries. Where she saw a young black teenager in a navy blue hoodie sitting on someone's porch, scrolling through his phone, her mind immediately constructed a threat. "He's been there for a while," she whispered to her sister, who was helping with the grocery bags. "Do you know him?" Her sister glanced over briefly. "No, but lots of kids come through selling things for school." "Probably that." Bethany wasn't convinced. She watched as Thomas stood up, stretched, and rang the doorbell again. When no one answered, he made a note in his folder and began to walk down the steps. "He's checking which houses are empty," Bethany decided, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling the police." "Better safe than sorry." Her sister sighed but didn't stop her. Living in the suburbs had taught her that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially with Bethany, who had strong opinions about everything. Inside her sister's kitchen, Bethany peered through the blinds as she dialed 911, her voice dropping to a hushed, urgent tone when the dispatcher answered. "There's a suspicious person in our neighborhood," she reported, watching as Thomas approached the next house. A young man, probably a teenager, going door to door, sitting on people's porches. "He looks like he might be casing houses." She paused when asked for a description. "He's black, wearing a dark blue hoodie and khaki pants, carrying some kind of folder or clipboard." The dispatcher assured her officers would be sent to check it out. Bethany felt a surge of satisfaction, the kind that comes from believing you've protected your community from an imagined threat. Meanwhile, Thomas was having surprising success at the Anderson household. Mrs. Anderson, a retired teacher, had bought 3 raffle tickets and told him about her grandson who also played basketball. "You remind me of him," she said warmly. Same polite manner. "You know, not enough young people look adults in the eye these days when they speak." Thomas beamed at the compliment. "My mom says the same thing. She says respect costs nothing but pays everything." As he left the Anderson house, his folder now containing 26 sold ticket stubs, Thomas noticed a police cruiser rolling slowly down the street. He thought nothing of it until a second cruiser appeared from the opposite direction. Both vehicles pulled to the curb just ahead of where he stood. 2 officers stepped out of the first car. One was tall with a weathered face and graying hair at his temples. The other was younger with a military-style haircut and stiff posture. From the second car emerged a female officer who hung back slightly, her hand resting casually near her holster. "Afternoon," said the older officer, approaching Thomas. "Mind if we ask what you're doing in this neighborhood?" Thomas felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the sensation his mother had warned him about and prepared him for. "Stay calm, be respectful. Remember who you are." "I'm selling raffle tickets for my school basketball team, sir," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite his quickening pulse. He held up his folder with the school logo clearly visible. "Roosevelt High." "We got a call about someone suspicious going door to door," the younger officer said, his tone making it clear that suspicious was a euphemism for something else.
"Can I see some ID?"
Thomas carefully reached for his wallet in his back pocket, movements deliberate and slow. "I have my student ID, sir." He produced the laminated card with his photo, name, and school information. The female officer had moved closer now. "How old are you, son?" 14, ma'am. "I'll be 15 in December." Across the street, Bethany had emerged from her sister's house. She stood with arms crossed, watching the interaction with a mixture of vindication and growing uncertainty. This wasn't playing out quite as dramatically as she'd imagined. The boy looked younger up close, his school uniform visible beneath the unzipped hoodie. The older officer examined Thomas's student ID and the fundraising materials. His face softened almost imperceptibly. "Basketball team needs new uniforms, huh?" "Yes, sir. And we're trying to fund a trip to the state tournament if we qualify." "Officer?" Bethany called out, approaching the scene with confident strides. "I'm the one who called." He was sitting on the Hendersons' porch for quite a while. "They're not home. They're in Europe for 2 weeks." The officers turned to acknowledge her. The younger one nodded. "Thank you, ma'am. We're just verifying his story. He doesn't live in this neighborhood." Bethany pressed, her voice carrying across lawns where curious neighbors had begun to appear. "I've never seen him around here before." Thomas felt his face grow hot with embarrassment as more people gathered to watch. 2 neighbors had taken out their phones, recording the scene from their driveways. "Ma'am," the older officer said with practiced patience, "he's selling raffle tickets for his school. Everything seems to be in order." Bethany wasn't satisfied. Well, he was looking in windows, walking around properties. It seemed suspicious. Thomas opened his mouth to protest but remembered his mother's advice. "Don't escalate. Stay calm. Your dignity matters more than winning an argument." A middle-aged man in a golf shirt approached from next door. "The kid came to my house about 20 minutes ago. He's selling raffle tickets for Roosevelt High. I bought 2. He looked at Thomas with an apologetic smile. "My son went there before we moved. Good school." The atmosphere shifted slightly, but Bethany doubled down. "Well, I still think we need to be careful. You hear about these things happening. People casing neighborhoods, using all sorts of excuses." The female officer turned to Thomas. "Is there someone we can call to verify you're supposed to be here? A parent or guardian?" Thomas nodded, his throat tight. This was escalating in exactly the way his mother had warned might happen someday. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because of assumptions about who belonged where. "I can call my mother," he said quietly. "That would be good," the older officer replied, his tone gentler now, perhaps sensing Thomas's discomfort. With slightly trembling fingers, Thomas pulled out his phone and dialed. The call connected after 2 rings. "Hey, Mom," he said, fighting to keep his voice level. "I'm still selling raffle tickets in Oak Ridge Heights, but there are some police officers here questioning me about it. Could you please talk to them?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then his mother's voice, calm but with an edge of steel that Thomas recognized all too well. "Put an officer on the phone, please." Thomas handed his phone to the older officer, who took it with a slightly puzzled expression. "This is Officer Reeves," he said professionally. Then his expression changed, eyebrows rising slightly. "Yes, ma'am." "I understand." "Yes, ma'am." A longer pause. "No, that won't be necessary, but—" "I see. Yes, Governor Johnson." "Of course." At the word governor, Bethany's face drained of color. The younger officer straightened his posture instinctively. Even the neighbors recording the scene moved closer, sensing that this ordinary afternoon had just taken an extraordinary turn. Officer Reeves handed the phone back to Thomas. "Your mother's on her way," he said, his tone now decidedly different. "She should be here in about 15 minutes. Thomas nodded, swallowing hard. He hadn't wanted to pull the "my mom is the governor" card. He never did. He wanted to be treated like any other kid, to make his own way. But sometimes the world didn't give him that chance. Bethany was now backing away slowly toward her sister's house, the realization dawning on her face like a slow-motion collision. She had called the police on the son of Governor Gabriel Johnson, the first black female governor in the state's history, a rising political star whose face had been on magazine covers and television screens for the past year. And now, Governor Johnson was on her way to this quiet street in Oak Ridge Heights, where an ordinary afternoon of selling raffle tickets had turned into something else entirely, a moment that would soon force everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about assumptions, belonging, and the invisible lines that still divided their community. The 15 minutes that followed felt like an eternity to Thomas. He stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, his raffle ticket folder clutched to his chest like armor. The officers had stepped a few paces away, huddled in conversation, occasionally glancing in his direction. From their body language, Thomas could tell they were figuring out how to handle this increasingly delicate situation. Neighbors had gathered in small clusters on their perfectly manicured lawns, pretending to water flowers or check mailboxes while stealing not-so-subtle glances at the scene unfolding on their quiet street. Some had given up all pretense and simply stood watching, phones held at the ready. Bethany had retreated to her sister's porch but hadn't gone inside. Her sister stood beside her, whispering urgently in her ear. Thomas could read the sister's expression even from a distance, a mixture of embarrassment and frustration directed at Bethany. Officer Reeves, the older policeman, approached Thomas again. His demeanor had shifted completely. "Thomas, right?" he asked, his voice gentle now. "I apologize for the misunderstanding. Your mother explained that you're participating in a school fundraiser." Thomas nodded, the knot in his stomach still tight. "Yes, sir. I have permission to be here. The school sent home forms that parents signed." He reached into his folder and produced a crumpled permission slip with his mother's elegant signature at the bottom. The younger officer had wandered over to speak with Bethany and her sister, his posture stiff and uncomfortable. The female officer remained by the cruiser, speaking into her radio, no doubt updating dispatch about the identity of Thomas's mother. A silver-haired man in pressed khakis approached from across the street. "I bought 2 tickets from this young man about an hour ago," he said to Officer Reeves. "He was nothing but polite. Looked me in the eye, called me sir. Don't see that much these days." Thomas recognized him, the retired judge who lived in the big corner house with the American flag always flying. He'd spent nearly 10 minutes talking to Thomas about basketball strategies. "Thank you, Judge Harrington," Officer Reeves replied with a respectful nod. More neighbors joined the impromptu gathering, many voicing support for Thomas. Mrs. Anderson, the retired teacher who had purchased 3 tickets, emerged from her house with a glass of lemonade that she pressed into Thomas's hands. "Drink this, dear. You look parched," she said kindly, then turned to face the small crowd. "This young man was nothing but respectful when he came to my door. Someone should be ashamed for causing such a fuss." Her pointed gaze left little doubt about who that someone was. Bethany shifted uncomfortably on the porch, her righteous indignation fading as public opinion turned against her. Her sister had disappeared inside, apparently wanting no part of the unfolding drama. Thomas sipped the lemonade, grateful for its sweetness and for Mrs. Anderson's kindness. He wished he could disappear, that the ground would open up and swallow him whole. He had never wanted to be the center of attention like this, especially not because of who his mother was. The distant wail of a siren cut through the afternoon air. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Of course there would be sirens. His mother never went anywhere without her security detail, a fact that had been a source of both pride and frustration throughout his childhood. 2 black SUVs with government plates turned onto the street, followed by a police motorcycle escort. The vehicles moved with deliberate slowness, as if allowing everyone time to absorb what was happening. They pulled to a smooth stop near the gathered crowd. Thomas watched as his mother emerged from the second SUV. Governor Gabrielle Johnson stood just under 5'8", but her presence made her seem taller. She wore a tailored navy pantsuit, her braided hair pulled back in a simple chignon. She moved with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to all eyes being on her. 2 plainclothes security agents flanked her as she approached, their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Officer Reeves straightened his uniform jacket and stepped forward to greet her. "Governor Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Officer Daniel Reeves. I apologize for the situation with your son." The governor shook his hand firmly, her expression professionally neutral. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your handling of things until I could arrive." Only then did she turn to Thomas, her public mask softening just slightly. "You okay, baby?" Thomas nodded, embarrassed by the endearment but also comforted by it. "I'm fine, Mom." She gave his shoulder a quick squeeze before turning back to the officers. "I'd like to understand exactly what happened here." Officer Reeves gestured toward Bethany, who looked like she wanted to evaporate on the spot. "We received a call about a suspicious person going door to door. When we arrived, we found your son selling raffle tickets for his school fundraiser." Governor Johnson nodded, her eyes finding Bethany on the porch. "And you're the person who made the call?" Bethany stepped forward reluctantly, her earlier confidence nowhere to be found.
Yes, I
was concerned about someone I didn't recognize in my sister's neighborhood." "I see," the governor replied, her tone measured. And what exactly did you find suspicious about my son? The question hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Everyone present knew its weight, understood the layers beneath the simple words. Bethany struggled for an answer that wouldn't incriminate her. He was sitting on a porch for a while, and I knew those homeowners were out of town. It just seemed unusual. Unusual, Governor Johnson repeated, the words stretching between them. Thomas, how long were you on the Hendersons' porch? Thomas shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Maybe 2 minutes? I rang the bell, waited, then sat down to update my sales log and text you about dinner. Mrs. Anderson stepped forward. Governor, if I may? I've been watching the neighborhood children sell things for years. Girl Scout cookies, wrapping paper, chocolate bars. I've never once seen the police called on any of them. Her implication was clear. Murmurs rippled through the gathered neighbors. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable at the direction the conversation was taking. Thomas watched his mother carefully. He knew her political face, the one that revealed nothing, that weighed every word for its potential impact. He also knew her mother face, the one that blazed with fierce protection for her only child. Right now, the two were battling for control. Governor Johnson took a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried to everyone present. I think we're all aware of what really happened here today. My son, an honor student, a basketball player, a child who says please and thank you without being reminded, became suspicious the moment he entered a neighborhood where few people look like him. She turned to address the officers directly. How many calls do you get about the white teenagers who sell the same raffle tickets in the same neighborhoods? Officer Reeves had the grace to look uncomfortable. I couldn't say exactly, ma'am. I think we both know the answer, she replied quietly. Bethany stepped forward, her voice quavering slightly. Governor Johnson, I want to apologize. I didn't know who your son was. That's exactly the problem, the governor interrupted, her voice still measured but with a new edge. You shouldn't need to know who his mother is to treat him with basic human dignity. My son shouldn't need a political title as a shield against bias. The crowd had grown silent. The only sounds, the distant chirping of birds and the occasional click of a phone camera. This was no longer just a neighborhood incident. It was becoming a moment. Thomas felt a strange mix of emotions, pride in his mother's eloquence, embarrassment at being the center of this drama, and a deep, familiar weariness. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, though usually on a smaller scale. It probably wouldn't be the last. Governor Johnson turned to her son, her eyes softening. Do you want to go home or would you like to finish your fundraising? Thomas straightened his shoulders. I still have 4 more houses on my list. I'd like to finish if that's okay. A small smile crossed his mother's face, pride mixed with a mother's endless worry. Of course, she turned back to address the gathering. I'm not here for apologies or explanations. I'm here because my son called me when he felt unfairly targeted. What I hope comes from this moment is reflection, about the assumptions we make about who belongs where, and about the lessons we're teaching our children about how to see each other. Mrs. Anderson nodded approvingly. Judge Harrington murmured agreement. Even some of the officers looked thoughtful. Bethany stood frozen, her face flushed with shame. Her sister had reappeared on the porch, hovering in the doorway like she was witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Governor Johnson checked her watch. Officers, I believe we've taken enough of your time. Unless there's anything else needed from my son. Officer Reeves shook his head quickly. No, ma'am. We're all set here. Good. Then I'll wait in the car while Thomas finishes his fundraising rounds. He's been taught to complete what he starts. She gave her son a meaningful look as the governor turned to walk back to her vehicle. The crowd began to disperse, neighbors drifting back to their homes with new gossip to digest and share. The police officers returned to their cruisers, clearly relieved to be exiting the scene. Thomas watched as Bethany finally retreated inside her sister's house, the door closing firmly behind her. He looked down at his folder, counted the houses left on his route, and took a deep breath. His mother had taught him many things. About dignity, about perseverance, about standing tall in uncomfortable moments. Today had been another lesson, though not one either of them had planned. With renewed determination, Thomas walked toward the next house on his list. Behind him, in the black SUV with tinted windows, his mother watched with a mixture of fierce pride and quiet heartbreak. knowing that for all her political power, she couldn't protect him from every Bethany in the world. Thomas knocked on the final door on his list, a modest brick house with wind chimes hanging from the porch and a small American flag stuck in a flower pot. He had sold 3 more tickets since the confrontation, bringing his total to 29, just one shy of his personal goal. The past hour had been strangely uncomfortable, with neighbors suddenly extra friendly, offering him cookies and lemonade, asking about basketball and school with forced cheerfulness. He knew what they were doing, trying to prove they weren't like Bethany. It was exhausting in its own way. The door opened to reveal an elderly man with thick glasses and a cardigan despite the warm weather. He squinted at Thomas. "Hello, sir." Thomas began his well-practiced pitch. "I'm selling raffle tickets for Roosevelt High's basketball team. We're raising money for new uniforms and hopefully a trip to the state tournament." The old man's face lit up with recognition, but not the kind Thomas expected. "You're the governor's boy, aren't you? Just saw it all happen down the street. My granddaughter was texting me play-by-play." He chuckled. Come in, come in. The wife's just made lemonade." Thomas hesitated. "That's very kind, but I should probably wrap up. My mom's waiting." Of course. How much for a ticket?" "I'll take 2. $10 each, sir." The man disappeared inside briefly before returning with a $50 bill. "Keep the change, son. Use it for those uniforms." Thomas thanked him, carefully writing out the tickets and recording the man's information. That made 30 tickets, goal achieved. As he turned to leave, the old man called after him. "You handled yourself well today. Got your mother's poise, I'd say." Thomas smiled politely and thanked him again, though the comment stirred mixed feelings. He'd spent his life hearing how much he was like his mother, how he had her eyes, her determination, her composure under pressure. It wasn't that he minded the comparison. He admired his mom more than anyone. But sometimes he wondered if people saw him at all, or just an extension of her. Walking back toward the waiting SUVs, Thomas noticed Bethany and her sister had emerged onto the porch again. They appeared to be in the middle of an intense conversation. When they spotted him, the sister nudged Bethany forward. Bethany looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, but after another nudge, she stepped off the porch and walked hesitantly toward him. Thomas tensed. He'd hoped to avoid another interaction with her. "Excuse me," Bethany called softly as she approached. The confidence that had fueled her earlier accusations was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made her twist her wedding ring around her finger repeatedly. Thomas stopped, keeping a careful distance between them. "Yes? I wanted to apologize," she said, her eyes darting to the SUVs where his mother waited, then back to him. "I made assumptions that weren't fair. I'm sorry about that." Thomas had been raised to accept apologies gracefully, but he was tired of being viewed with suspicion, tired of having to be perfectly polite to prove he belonged, tired of carrying the weight of other people's assumptions. "Why did you call the police?" he asked directly, surprising himself with the question. Bethany blinked, clearly thrown by his response. She'd expected a simple acceptance of her apology, not a conversation. I was concerned about someone I didn't recognize in the neighborhood. There were at least 5 other kids from my school selling tickets today," Thomas said. 2 white girls were working the next street over. "Did you call the police on them too?" Color rose in Bethany's cheeks. "I didn't see them. Would you have called if you had?" The question hung between them. They both knew the answer. From the SUV, Governor Johnson watched her son standing his ground. Her security detail had tensed when Bethany approached, but the governor had signaled them to wait. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could read body language well enough to know this was important, for both of them. "I don't think I'm a racist," Bethany finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have black friends. I voted for your mother." Thomas had heard variations of this defense before. His mother had explained how people often believed their conscious intentions were all that mattered, not the impact of their actions. "I'm not calling you racist," Thomas said carefully. "I'm asking you to think about why a black kid selling raffle tickets seemed more suspicious to you than white kids doing the same thing." A tear slipped down Bethany's cheek. She quickly wiped it away. "I'm sorry," she repeated, this time with more feeling. "I really am." Thomas nodded, suddenly exhausted by the whole thing. "I know. Thank you for saying so." He turned to continue walking to the SUVs when Bethany spoke again. "Would your mom be willing to talk to me? I'd like to apologize to her too." Thomas glanced toward the vehicles where his mother sat waiting. "You'd have to ask her security team, but probably not today. She has a charity dinner tonight." He paused, then added, "You could write to her office." He left Bethany standing there and continued toward the SUVs. One of the security agents stepped out to open the door for him. As Thomas slid into the seat beside his mother, he felt the weight of the day settle onto his shoulders. Governor Johnson studied her son's face. "You okay?" Thomas nodded, though the tightness in his throat suggested otherwise. "She apologized. Did she now?" His mother's tone was neutral, giving nothing away.
And how do you feel about that?
Thomas stared out the window as the vehicles pulled away from the curb. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfect lawns of Oak Ridge Heights. "I don't know. Tired, I guess." His mother reached for his hand, her grip firm and warm. It was the same hand that signed bills into law, that shook hands with senators and corporate executives, that had once cradled him as an infant. In moments like this, she wasn't Governor Johnson, she was just Mom. "You handled yourself with dignity today," she said softly. "I'm proud of you for that. But it's okay to be angry too, you know. You don't always have to be the bigger person." Thomas felt the sharp sting of tears and blinked them back. "I know." The security agent in the front seat cleared his throat. "Ma'am, the press has gotten wind of the incident. There are reporters gathering at the mansion. Your communications director is requesting guidance." Governor Johnson sighed. Of course the press had found out. In an age where everyone had a camera in their pocket, privacy was an illusion, especially for public figures. "Tell Diane to prepare a brief statement. No names, just the facts. This isn't about one individual's actions. It's about a broader pattern that needs addressing." She turned to Thomas. "How do you feel about this becoming news?" Thomas groaned. "Do I have a choice?" "Always," his mother assured him. "If you don't want this to become public, I'll shut it down. We can handle the press." Thomas considered this. He thought about the other kids who looked like him, who didn't have a governor for a mother to protect them when they were viewed with suspicion for simply existing in spaces where they were deemed not to belong. "It's okay," he decided. "Maybe it'll help someone else." His mother squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with pride and a deeper sadness. "That's very brave. But remember what I've always told you. Your job isn't to educate people about their bias." Thomas finished the familiar family motto. "Your job is to be a kid." By the time they arrived at the governor's mansion, Thomas could see the news vans lined up along the street. Security directed their vehicles to the private entrance at the back, avoiding the cameras and shouted questions. Inside, the governor's staff bustled about, phones pressed to ears responding to the growing story. Thomas slipped away to his room while his mother transformed back into Governor Johnson, the public figure who would now have to address yet another incident of racial profiling in their state. Alone in his bedroom, Thomas finally allowed himself to feel everything he'd been holding back: the frustration, the anger, the hurt, and strangely, a glimmer of hope. He tossed his folder of raffle tickets onto his desk and flopped onto his bed, staring at the basketball posters on his ceiling. His phone buzzed with text messages from teammates and friends who had somehow already heard what happened. News traveled fast, especially when it involved the governor's son. Thomas ignored the messages for now. He needed a moment to process everything himself before dealing with everyone else's reactions. There was a gentle knock at his door. His mother entered without waiting for a response, having changed from her navy suit into more comfortable clothes, yoga pants, and one of his old basketball tournament t-shirts that she'd claimed years ago. "The vultures are circling," she said with a tired smile. "Diane's handling them for now. I pushed back the charity dinner by an hour so we could talk." Thomas sat up. "Don't miss your dinner because of me." His mother sat beside him on the bed. "Thomas, nothing is more important to me than you. Nothing. Not speeches, not legislation, not campaign promises. You." "I know," he said quietly. "Do you want to talk about what happened with that woman? Bethany?" Thomas shrugged. "She apologized. Said she wasn't racist." Governor Johnson snorted softly. "Of course she did. I asked her why she called the police on me but not on the white kids selling tickets. She didn't have an answer." His mother nodded. They rarely do. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, The kind that exists between people who understand each other deeply. Coach wants to know if I sold all my tickets, Thomas finally said, gesturing to his folder. Did you? 30? My goal was 30. She smiled, a genuine one that reached her eyes. That's my boy. Always exceeding expectations. Thomas felt a surge of warmth at her praise, but it was quickly replaced by a heaviness. Mom, does it ever get easier? Dealing with this stuff? Governor Johnson's expression turned serious. She chose her words carefully, as she did when answering the most important questions. Not easier exactly. You just get better at carrying it. And you find people who understand the weight, who help you carry it sometimes. She pulled him into a hug. And for a moment, Thomas allowed himself to be just a kid being comforted by his mom after a rough day. Not the governor's son at the center of what would surely become tomorrow's headline. Outside, the press continued to gather. Inside, mother and son held on to each other, both knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Press conferences, public statements, perhaps even protests. But for now, in this quiet room, they had each other, and that was enough. The morning headlines screamed across every local paper and news site. Governor Johnson confronts racial profiling after son targeted. Thomas scrolled through his phone at the breakfast table, stomach nodding as he saw video clips from Oak Ridge Heights already going viral. Someone had captured the entire interaction between his mother and Bethany, including the moment when Governor Johnson asked why her son had been deemed suspicious. Don't read that stuff, his mother advised, sweeping into the kitchen in her workout clothes, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Despite the early hour, she looked fully alert. Years of pre-dawn meetings had trained her body to function before most people had their first cup of coffee. It'll just upset you. Too late, Thomas mumbled, turning his phone screen down on the table. They're calling her Neighborhood Nancy online. The governor poured herself a cup of coffee. That's not helpful. Reducing this to memes and nicknames trivializes the real issue. But that's what people do now, Thomas argued. They need to give everything a catchy name so it's easier to talk about. His mother sat across from him, and that's exactly the problem. This isn't about one woman making a bad choice. It's about patterns and systems that make those choices seem reasonable to people. Thomas pushed his cereal bowl away, no longer hungry. Everyone at school will have seen it by now. The realization hit hard. Thomas had always tried to be just another student at Roosevelt High, not the governor's kid. His mother's position already made him stand out more than he wanted. Now this incident would define him in a whole new way. I spoke with Principal Wallace last night, his mother said gently. He's prepared to support you however you need. You can take a day or two off if you want. Thomas shook his head firmly. No way. That would just make it a bigger deal. Governor Johnson studied her son with a mixture of pride and concern. You're probably right. Facing it head-on might be better. She glanced at her watch. I need to get ready. Press conference at 9. What are you going to say? The truth. That what happened to you happens to black children and adults every day across our state. That calling the police on people for simply existing in a space while black puts lives at risk. That we need to do better. She paused. Unless you'd rather I didn't mention you specifically. Thomas considered this. Part of him wanted to hide from the spotlight, to stay anonymous. But another part remembered what he'd told his mother yesterday. Maybe this could help someone else. It's okay, just... He hesitated. Don't make me sound like a victim, okay? I don't want people feeling sorry for me. His mother's expression softened. I would never. I'll talk about how proud I am of how you handled yourself. Because I am, Thomas. So very proud. An hour later, Thomas sat in his first period history class, intensely aware of the stares and whispers around him. His phone had been buzzing nonstop with notifications until he finally turned it off completely. His best friend Lee had met him at his locker with a supportive fist bump and walked with him to class, providing a buffer against the curious looks. Dude, you're trending on Twitter, Lee had informed him. My cousin in Atlanta texted me about it. Thomas groaned. Great. Now, trying to focus on Mr. Peterson's lecture about the civil rights movement, timing that felt almost too coincidental, Thomas noticed a notification pop up on the classroom smartboard. Someone had sent a link to the teacher's computer, and before Mr. Peterson could close it, the video from yesterday began playing for the entire class to see. The classroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Mr. Peterson frantically tried to close the window, but the damage was done. 25 pairs of eyes turned toward Thomas, who felt his face burning with embarrassment. That was completely inappropriate, Mr. Peterson said sternly, scanning the room for the culprit. Whoever did that will be sent to Principal Wallace immediately if I find out. Thomas stared down at his textbook, wishing he could disappear. Then unexpectedly a voice spoke up from the back of the room. That took guts, Thomas. It was Zoe Chen, the quiet girl who rarely spoke in class. Standing up to that lady like that, another classmate chimed in. Yeah, man, my dad gets that kind of stuff all the time when he's working. He's an electrician and people always think he's not supposed to be in their fancy neighborhoods. Suddenly, the classroom transformed into an impromptu discussion about racial profiling, with students sharing stories about their own family's experiences. Mr. Peterson, sensing a teaching moment, set aside his planned lecture. Perhaps, he suggested, this connects to our civil rights unit more directly than I had anticipated. Thomas, would you be comfortable if we discussed what happened yesterday in an educational context? You're under no obligation. Thomas hesitated, then nodded slowly. Talking about it on his own terms felt better than being whispered about behind his back. By lunchtime, the video of the governor's press conference was being shared across social media. Thomas watched it on Lee's phone in the cafeteria, surrounded by a protective circle of basketball teammates. On screen, his mother stood at a podium, her expression serious but composed. Yesterday, my son was selling raffle tickets for his school basketball team when someone called the police, reporting him as suspicious. The only thing suspicious about my son was the color of his skin in a neighborhood where few residents look like him. She continued, her voice steady. This isn't about one incident or one person's actions. This is about a pattern that repeats itself across our state and our nation every day. Black children are viewed with suspicion, where white children are seen as innocent. Black adults are questioned where white adults are welcomed. These aren't just inconveniences, they're potentially dangerous situations. Thomas felt a surge of pride as he watched his mother speak with such clarity and conviction. As governor, I have a responsibility to address this issue. As a mother, I have an obligation to protect not just my child, but all children in our state from the harm that comes from these assumptions and biases. She announced a new initiative to provide additional bias training for law enforcement and a community conversation series that would bring together residents, police, and community leaders to address racial profiling. What happened to my son yesterday will be a catalyst for change, she concluded. But it shouldn't take being the governor's child to be treated with dignity and respect. Every person deserves that basic human right. As the video ended, Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. Thomas, this is Bethany Miller. Your mother's office gave me your number. I'd like to speak with you and your mother if possible. I want to be part of the solution. Thomas showed the message to Lee, who raised his eyebrows. You gonna respond? Before Thomas could decide, another text came through, this one from his mother. Getting multiple interview requests. CNN, MSNBC, local stations. Entirely your choice if you want to participate. Love you. The weight of public attention felt overwhelming. Thomas had never asked to be a symbol or a spokesperson. He'd just been trying to sell raffle tickets for new basketball uniforms. After school, Thomas found a news van parked outside his house. His mother's security detail kept the reporters at bay as he hurried inside. In the safety of the foyer, he leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. The governor's chief of staff, Diane, greeted him with an apologetic smile. Sorry about the circus out there. Your mom is in her study taking calls. She asked not to be disturbed unless it was you. Thomas nodded his thanks and made his way through the mansion to his mother's private study. He knocked softly before entering. Governor Johnson was at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, but she immediately ended the call when she saw her son. How was school? She asked, concern evident in her voice. Thomas collapsed into the leather chair across from her desk. Weird, everyone's seen the video. Mr. Peterson turned it into a class discussion about civil rights. His mother winced. I'm sorry, honey. It's okay. It was actually kind of good, I guess. People shared their own stories. He pulled out his phone. Bethany texted me. Said your office gave her my number. The governor's eyebrows shot up. Absolutely not. No one on my staff would do that without permission. Then how did she get it? That's a very good question. She held out her hand for his phone, reading the message with a frown. This is concerning. We should report this to security. As they were discussing how Bethany might have obtained his number, Diane knocked and entered the study. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you should see this immediately. She handed the governor a tablet. On the screen was a social media post from Bethany Miller. It included a lengthy statement about the incident, acknowledging her mistake and apologizing publicly. But what caught Thomas's attention was the last line. I've reached out to Thomas privately to apologize again and to ask how I can be part of making things better, not worse. She's using this for damage control, the governor said, her voice tight with anger, making it seem like you're in communication, establishing a narrative that she's taking responsibility. Classic PR move. Thomas felt manipulated. Even his private phone number wasn't off limits. There's more, Diane added reluctantly. She's been invited to appear on Channel 5 News tonight to share her journey of learning and growth. They've asked if you would appear alongside her. Governor? Absolutely not, Governor Johnson replied firmly. I won't help her turn this into her redemption story. Thomas stared at the social media post, reading and rereading Bethany's carefully crafted words. Something about the performative nature of it all left him feeling hollow. What do you want to do about this? His mother asked him. It's your story too. Thomas thought about all the attention, the interviews, the discussions, the way his personal experience was rapidly becoming public property. He thought about Bethany, about her tear-stained face when she apologized, and now her attempt to control the narrative. I don't want to do any interviews, he decided. I don't want to be on TV with her. I just want to play basketball and sell my raffle tickets and be a normal kid. His mother reached across the desk and took his hand. Then that's exactly what we'll protect. Your right to be a kid, not a symbol or a talking point. She turned to Diane. Issue a statement that we'll be declining all interviews regarding the incident. Emphasize that Thomas is a minor whose privacy should be respected. And find out how Ms. Miller got my son's personal phone number. As Diane left to carry out these instructions, Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His mother understood what he needed. Not to become the face of a movement, but simply to be allowed to process what had happened in his own way, on his own terms. Thanks, Mom, he said quietly. Governor Johnson smiled at her son, the smile reserved just for him, not the polished one she used for cameras and constituents. Always, baby, always. 1 month had passed since the incident in Oak Ridge Heights. The media frenzy had eventually died down after Governor Johnson refused all interview requests and issued a cease and desist letter to prevent news outlets from publishing photos or videos of Thomas. As a minor, he had legal protections that his mother leveraged skillfully to shield him from the worst of the public attention. Life had mostly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be when your mother was the governor and you had briefly become the center of a viral news story. Thomas sat on the bleachers after basketball practice, unlacing his shoes while his teammates horsed around nearby. Coach Taylor approached, clipboard in hand. Good practice today, Johnson. Your three-point shot is looking solid. Thomas nodded. Thanks, Coach. Listen, I wanted to let you know. We raised enough for the new uniforms and the tournament trip with some left over. The raffle was our most successful fundraiser ever. He paused. A lot of that was because of you. You sold more tickets than anyone else on the team. Thomas shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise that felt tied to his unwanted moment in the spotlight. After the incident, people from all over the state had contacted the school asking to buy raffle tickets from the governor's son. The story had turned into a strange kind of publicity for the fundraiser. I just did what everyone else did, Thomas said. Coach Taylor studied him for a moment. You know, sometimes things happen to us that we didn't ask for. The question is what we do with them afterward. He handed Thomas an envelope. This came for the team today. Thought you might want to see it first. Thomas opened the envelope and pulled out a letter printed on official state letterhead. It was from his mother's office announcing the creation of a new youth sports equity initiative that would provide funding to ensure all schools in the state could afford equipment, uniforms, and travel expenses for their sports programs. Your mom's turning what happened to you into something good for a lot of kids, Coach Taylor said. The first grant is going to Westside High. Westside was across town in a predominantly black neighborhood. Their basketball team consistently performed well despite having outdated equipment and uniforms. They often couldn't afford to travel to tournament games. She never mentioned this to me, Thomas said, surprised. It just got approved yesterday, according to the letter. There's going to be an announcement ceremony next week. They're asking if our team would attend. Thomas felt a complicated mix of emotions: pride in his mother's ability to create meaningful change, discomfort at being connected to a public event linked to the incident, relief that something positive was coming from the humiliation he'd experienced. "I'll be there," he decided. Later that evening, as Thomas worked on homework at the kitchen counter, his mother arrived home earlier than usual. She looked tired but satisfied, the expression she wore when she'd accomplished something meaningful. "I heard about the youth sports initiative," Thomas said as she set down her briefcase. The governor paused. "I was going to tell you tonight. I wanted to make sure it was finalized first." "It's cool," Thomas said sincerely. "Really cool, actually. Westside's team deserves better equipment." His mother smiled, relieved by his positive reaction. "The idea came from something you said right after it happened, about selling raffle tickets because the school couldn't afford new uniforms. It got me thinking about all the schools that struggle with basic funding for their programs." She opened the refrigerator, surveying the contents. "I thought maybe we could find a way to create something positive from what happened. Not to erase it or pretend it was okay, but to build something meaningful in response to it." Thomas nodded. "Coach said there's going to be a ceremony." "Yes, at Westside High, but you don't have to attend if you don't want to. I've been very clear that you're not to be put in the spotlight." Thomas considered this. For weeks he'd avoided anything connected to the incident, turning down requests to speak at community events or student groups. But this felt different somehow. "I want to go," he said. "Our whole team is going." His mother looked pleased. "That's wonderful. The Westside team will be there too, of course." She pulled out ingredients for a sandwich. "There's something else I should tell you. Bethany Miller has asked to attend." Thomas felt his body tense. Why would she be there? Governor Johnson assembled her sandwich thoughtfully before answering. "She's been doing some actual work since the incident. Not just social media posts and TV appearances. She's been meeting with community leaders, taking classes on racial bias, volunteering at a community center in Westside." She looked at her son. "People can change, Thomas. Sometimes it takes a shock to their system to realize they need to." Thomas wasn't sure how he felt about that. Part of him was still angry at how Bethany had tried to use the situation for her own image rehabilitation. Another part remembered how genuinely ashamed she had looked when confronted with her assumptions. "What do you think?" he asked his mother. "About her being there?" The governor considered carefully. "I think people deserve the chance to show they've learned and grown. But I also think you get to set boundaries about your own story. If you don't want her there, she won't be invited." Thomas appreciated that his mother was giving him a choice, treating him not just as her son who needed protection, but as someone whose voice mattered in decisions that affected him. "She can come," he decided. "But I don't want to have to talk to her." "That's completely fair." The day of the ceremony arrived bright and clear. Both basketball teams, Roosevelt High and Westside High, gathered in Westside's gymnasium, which was decorated with banners and balloons. Local media had been allowed limited access, with strict instructions not to focus on Thomas or ask him any questions. Governor Johnson stood at the podium, looking both official in her role as state leader and warmly maternal as she addressed the young athletes. Thomas sat with his teammates, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Today marks the beginning of an initiative that will ensure all young athletes in our state have access to the equipment, uniforms, and opportunities they need to excel, the governor announced. The Youth Sports Equity Initiative will provide grants to schools whose programs have been historically underfunded. She went on to explain how the program would work, the application process, and the commitment to equitable distribution across all communities. She did not mention the incident that had inspired it, focusing instead on the positive impact it would have. From his seat, Thomas spotted Bethany Miller standing at the back of the gymnasium. She was not seeking attention or making her presence known, simply observing quietly. She caught Thomas looking and gave a small, tentative nod of acknowledgement. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded back. After the formal speeches, the two basketball teams mingled on the court, sharing pizza and soda. The West Side captain, a tall boy named Andre, approached Thomas. "Your mom's pretty cool," he said, offering a fist bump. "This program is going to help a lot of schools like ours." Thomas bumped his fist. "Yeah, she's pretty good at making things happen." "I heard about what went down in that fancy neighborhood," Andre continued. "That kind of stuff happens to my cousins all the time. Nobody calls the governor for them, though." "I know," Thomas said quietly. That's part of why this program is important. It shouldn't matter who your parents are. Andre nodded in agreement. Hey, we're having a 3-point contest after we eat. You in? Thomas grinned. Definitely. As the boys moved toward the basketball court, Thomas noticed his mother deep in conversation with Bethany. They spoke for several minutes, their expressions serious but not hostile. Eventually, they shook hands before parting ways. Later on the drive home, Thomas asked about the exchange. She's starting a neighborhood watch program, Governor Johnson explained, but not the kind that calls the police on people who don't belong. It's about neighbors actually getting to know each other, building relationships across communities. Do you think she means it? Thomas asked. Or is it just for show? His mother considered this. I think she had a genuine wake-up call. Whether it lasts or leads to real change in how she sees the world, that depends on her doing the hard, uncomfortable work of examining her biases. People can surprise you, though. Thomas looked out the window, watching the neighborhoods change as they drove from one part of the city to another. The captain of Westside's team invited me to practice with them sometimes. That sounds like a good opportunity, his mother replied. Both teams could benefit from playing against different styles. Thomas nodded. That's what I was thinking, too. As they pulled up to the governor's mansion, Thomas noticed the security seemed lighter than it had been in weeks. The media trucks were gone. The extra patrols had been reduced. Life was settling back into its rhythms. Mom, he said as they walked toward the house. I'm glad something good came out of what happened. Governor Johnson put her arm around her son's shoulders. That's how change often works. Something painful happens and we have a choice. Let it just be painful or let it also be productive. You helped make this productive, Thomas. Inside, Thomas headed straight to his room to change out of his uniform. On his bed lay a package wrapped in simple brown paper. A note from his mother's assistant explained that it had been screened by security and deemed safe to deliver. Thomas opened it cautiously. Inside was a basketball, brand new and gleaming. A note was attached with a simple message. Basketball brought you to Oak Ridge Heights. Maybe someday it can bring Oak Ridge Heights to you. Thank you for teaching me a difficult but necessary lesson. Bethany Miller. Thomas bounced the ball experimentally on his bedroom floor. It had a good feel to it, well-balanced and responsive. He thought about Andre and the West Side team, about the new uniforms his own team would receive, about the schools across the state that would benefit from the new initiative. One moment of bias had led to confrontation, which had led to conversation, which had led to action. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was progress. Thomas tucked the ball under his arm and headed back downstairs. His mother was in her home office, already deep in work despite the weekend. Hey, Mom, he called from the doorway. Want to shoot some hoops? I got a new ball. Governor Johnson looked up from her laptop, surprised and pleased. You know I'm terrible at basketball. Thomas grinned. That's okay. I'll teach you. And for the rest of the afternoon, they were just a mother and son playing basketball in the driveway, laughing at missed shots and celebrating small victories, building their own kind of bridge across their different experiences of the same shared world.